Why did no one notice the woman sitting near the back of the briefing room? Her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. The projector hummed. Maps flickered. Voices overlapped. Marines leaned forward, boots scraping the floor, adrenaline already humming through their veins. The embassy rooftop was about to become a last stand, and everyone in that room knew it. Everyone except her, it seemed. Or maybe everyone chose not to know. She kept her eyes lowered, not out of fear but habit, the habit of being overlooked, of letting louder people assume they understood the battlefield better simply because they spoke with certainty. Her badge read Clay Vance, cybersecurity liaison, support role, non-combatant. Someone snorted when they read it. She felt it anyway, the dismissal, the quiet judgment. She swallowed it like she always did. By the time the first Molotov cocktail shattered against the embassy wall, Clay was already on the roof, fingers moving fast over a ruggedized laptop, satellite link blinking in and out as the city below began to burn. The air smelled like fuel and dust and panic. Radios screamed. Orders collided. Somewhere below, a crowd roared with the hunger of something that had decided tonight was the night. "Hold the perimeter," a man shouted. Gunny Sergeant Sullivan. Everyone knew his voice. It filled space. It crushed doubt. It demanded obedience. He believed war was a volume contest, that if you were loud enough, brutal enough, the enemy would blink first. Clay barely looked up when his shadow fell across her workstation. "Hey, tech girl." She paused just long enough. "Stop playing video games and grab a rifle," he barked, kicking a coil of cable toward her boots. "We need shooters, not geeks." Her mouth opened, closed. She chose her words carefully. "Sergeant, I need to encrypt the hard drives if this place falls and that data." "I don't care about your hard drives." The laptop slammed shut under his hand, too close to her fingers. Her breath caught, not from pain, from the sudden, sharp realization that she had become invisible in the worst possible way. "We're about to be overrun," he continued. "Pick up a weapon and fight like a man." The words stung more than she expected. She glanced at the rifle on the ground, heavy, familiar, dangerous in the wrong hands. Someone laughed. "She's shaking," Sullivan said to the others, amused, "scared of the gun." She wasn't shaking. Her hands were steady, but explaining that would take time they didn't have. "This is why women don't belong in kill zones," he went on. "Go play with dolls, sweetheart. Leave the fighting to the big boys." He shoved her toward the stairwell. "Get inside, hide." The door slammed behind her. For a moment Clay just stood there, the sounds of battle muffled but relentless. Her chest felt tight, not fear, humiliation, the kind that doesn't scream, just settles deep and heavy. They thought she was useless. They thought wrong. She leaned against the concrete wall, closed her eyes, and began to count. Wind direction, gust intervals. The way the flag on the adjacent building snapped harder every 12 seconds. Her breathing slowed. She wasn't hiding. She was remembering who she was. The first body came through the door screaming. Blood everywhere. A Marine dragged him in, hands slippery, voice cracking as he yelled for a medic. Panic spiked. Radios screeched. "They've got a sniper," someone shouted. "Long range." Clay opened her eyes. That changed everything. An enemy sniper had turned the rooftop into a killing ground. Shots punched through sandbags like paper. Every time someone moved, someone fell. Distance, precision, confidence. Whoever it was, he was good. Sullivan grabbed a fallen rifle, cursed as glass exploded into his face when another round shattered the scope. He fell back, half-blind, fury giving way to something else. Fear. "We can't see him," he yelled into the radio. "We need air." "Negative," came the reply. "Sandstorm inbound, you're on your own." Clay stepped out of the stairwell shadows. No one noticed at first. She moved with quiet purpose to a long, narrow rifle case resting against the wall. Embassy security property. Untouched. Unused. Because no one on that roof believed they could make that shot. "What are you doing?" Sullivan rasped. She ignored him. The rifle came together in her hands like memory. 12 seconds, click, lock, set. "Put that down," he shouted. "That's not a toy." Her voice when she spoke was calm, flat. "He's not in the clock tower." "What?" "The echo's wrong. He's on the crane, Sector 4. Laughter, desperation masked as confidence. "That's over a mile away." Clay didn't argue. She never had. She exposed herself just enough to see. The storm clawed at her face. The crane swayed. The target was barely a thought. Inside her chest, something settled, a familiar stillness, the place where doubt couldn't reach her. Ignored, dismissed, mocked. None of it mattered now. She breathed and squeezed. The shot tore through the storm like a promise kept. Seconds stretched, physics argued, reality bent. Then far away something fell. Silence swallowed the roof. "Target down," she said softly. She didn't stop. Leader in the crowd, RPG team on the opposite roof, each decision clean, necessary, final. The mob broke, the siege cracked. And still she wasn't done. The helicopter came without warning, black, unmarked, the kind of threat that didn't ask permission. Everyone ran. Clay didn't. One round left. She aimed not at the man but the machine, at the place no one looked, the place that failed first. The recoil hit her like truth. The helicopter died in fire. When it was over, she returned to her laptop, fingers steady again. Encryption complete. The SEALs arrived to a rooftop that no longer needed saving. They saluted her. Sullivan couldn't meet her eyes. She didn't raise her voice, didn't savor the moment. She just said what needed to be said. And walked away. Because dignity doesn't shout. Sometimes it simply acts. Why did the silence after the shot feel heavier than the gunfire that came before it? For a few heartbeats, no one moved. Not the Marines frozen behind shredded sandbags. Not the embassy staff pressed against concrete walls, hands over mouths. Even the city below seemed to hesitate, as if it needed confirmation that what had just happened was real. Clay stayed behind the scope. She didn't celebrate, she didn't even blink. Because experience had taught her that disbelief was dangerous, that the moment people relaxed was the moment something else tried to kill you. Her cheek was still welded to the stock, her breathing stayed shallow, controlled. She watched the crane through magnified glass, tracking the empty space where the sniper had been. Wind still pushed against steel. Dust still moved like living smoke. Physics didn't care that a life had ended. "Was that?" someone whispered behind her. She cycled the bolt. The sound was calm, mechanical, final. That was when the screaming started again. Below the rooftop, the mob didn't understand what had happened, only that something invisible was suddenly hunting them. Fear rippled through bodies packed shoulder to shoulder. Leaders shouted contradictory orders. Someone fired wildly into the air. Another dropped to their knees. Clay lifted her head just enough to scan wider. Her chest tightened. This wasn't over. She spotted the man in the green shirt before anyone else did. Not because he was armed, but because he was. He stood elevated, megaphone raised, eyes sharp, moving people like pieces on a board. The kind of man who never pulled a trigger himself. The kind who caused far more damage. She felt a familiar resistance in her gut. This one won't be clean. The distance was shorter, the wind less cruel, but the movement was chaotic, civilians mixed in. Panic distorted trajectories. She hesitated. Once, long ago, someone had told her that hesitation was weakness, that snipers couldn't afford conscience. That distance erased responsibility. They were wrong. Distance sharpened it. She waited 3 steps, 4, clear lane. She fired. The megaphone clattered to the pavement mid-sentence. The mob shattered. Only then did the Marines begin to breathe again. Sullivan crawled closer, his face streaked with blood and dust, disbelief replacing rage. He didn't speak. He just watched her, as if trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the story he had already decided was true. Clay ignored the weight of his stare. Her world had narrowed again. She scanned rooftops. There, across the street, a flash of movement too deliberate to be accidental, a man lifting a tube onto his shoulder, the slow, practiced motions of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. RPG. Her jaw tightened. This was why she hated being pulled off the line, why hiding behind screens felt like suffocation. Because when seconds mattered, skill wasn't optional, it was mercy. She adjusted, fired. The explosion never came. For a brief moment, no one spoke. No one cheered. The Marines simply stared at her, awe creeping in where mockery had lived minutes before. She felt none of it. Instead, a different memory surfaced, unwanted and sharp. 2 years earlier, mountains, cold air, a breath she never got to finish before everything went wrong. She blinked hard and shoved it away. Stay here. The storm thickened, visibility dropped, the world turned sepia and violent. That was when the helicopter appeared. The sound hit first, a low, predatory thrum that vibrated in bone. Clay felt it through her boots before she saw it crest the building line, black against brown sky. Not friendly. She knew it instantly. No markings, wrong approach angle, the kind of aircraft that didn't evacuate, it erased. Take cover, someone screamed. Marines dove, staff scattered, radios fell silent under instinct. Clay stayed standing. Not because she was fearless. Because she was calculating. She felt something old and heavy settle into her spine, the awareness that this moment would define something. Not history, not heroism, herself. She had one round left. Sullivan shouted her name, actually said it this time, not tech girl, not she. Run. She didn't. The gunner's silhouette filled the open door. The pilot sat behind armored glass, hands steady, trusting the machine. Clay knew that trust. She didn't aim at flesh. She aimed at failure. The rotor mast vibrated in her scope, a tiny hydraulic assembly exposed for maintenance efficiency, a design compromise. Engineers always made them. They had to. She exhaled. Fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder like a confession. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the helicopter shuddered. Metal screamed. The aircraft lurched sideways, tail whipping, gravity suddenly remembered. It spiraled down behind the building in a bloom of fire and sound that rattled teeth and windows and nerves. The rooftop went quiet. Not relief quiet. Reckoning quiet. Clay lowered the rifle. Her arms trembled now. The storm stung her eyes. She tasted blood where she'd bitten her lip without noticing. Only then did she feel it. The weight. Every life ended, every life saved, the invisible ledger she carried alone. She knelt by her laptop, fingers shaking just slightly as she opened it again. Encryption complete, she said, softer than before. No one laughed. When the SEALs fast-roped onto the roof minutes later, they moved with efficient disbelief. Their leader scanned the scene, eyes sharp, absorbing impossible distances and unlikely angles. He stopped in front of Clay. Saluted. "Commander Vance," he said, "we heard Echo was active." The word hit her harder than the recoil. Active. Not hidden, not buried, not forgotten. Sullivan stood frozen nearby, helmet tucked under his arm like a child who'd broken something important. He started. Clay closed her laptop, slung her bag over her shoulder, walked past him. Only then did she stop. She looked up at him, really looked, saw exhaustion, fear, the cost of always being loud because silence scared you. "I don't need your apology," she said quietly. "I need you to remember this feeling." He swallowed. She tapped his chest once, not hard, not cruel. "Next time you see someone quiet," she continued, "ask what they know before you decide what they are." She turned away. As the extraction rotors lifted her from the roof, Clay looked down at the shrinking city, at the smoke, the chaos, the people who would never know how close they'd come to dying. She felt tired, not broken. Just human. Strength, she had learned, wasn't about being seen. Sometimes it was about enduring invisibility, until the moment action spoke louder than belief. And sometimes the most powerful voice on the battlefield was the one that waited. Why did the noise return only after she was gone? The rotors faded into the storm, carrying Clay away from the rooftop, away from the staring eyes and half-formed legends already being whispered. For a moment, suspended beneath the helicopter, she felt untethered, not heroic, not victorious, just hollow, like a room after everyone leaves. Below her, the city kept burning. She didn't watch it, she closed her eyes instead. That was the dangerous part. Silence always invited memory. The flight medic tried to speak to her, asked if she was hurt, asked if she needed water. Clay nodded once, mechanically, accepting a bottle she didn't remember opening. Her hands were steady again. That bothered her more than shaking ever would have. Across from her, Master Chief Hayes studied her without staring. Professionals recognized professionals. He didn't thank her, didn't praise her. He knew better. "You okay?" he asked finally, voice low under the engine roar. Clay considered lying. "I will be," she said. He nodded. That was enough. The helicopter banked hard, avoiding another plume of smoke. The motion tugged at something buried in her chest, and without permission, the past slipped in. Mountains. Cold air so sharp it burned the lungs. A different rifle, a different team. 2 years ago she had been perfect. That was the problem. They'd inserted before dawn, snow crunching softly under boots, breath fogging in rhythm. The target was high value, the intel solid, the shot impossible for anyone else. For her, it had been inevitable. She remembered the weight of the trigger, the way the world narrowed, the calm that followed. She also remembered the scream in her earpiece afterward, not enemy, friendly. A variable no one had accounted for. A child stepping into a doorway at the exact wrong second. Not hit, but close enough, too close. The mission succeeded. The fallout didn't. Her identity leaked weeks later, not officially, but enough. A whisper passed through the wrong channels. A cartel with long memories and longer knives took interest. The Navy didn't ask her opinion. They pulled her out, quietly, cleanly, like erasing chalk from a board. Cyber division, desk screens, distance. "For your safety," they said. "For your usefulness," she heard. Clay opened her eyes as the helicopter touched down at a forward base. Night swallowed them. Red lights blinked. Hands helped her up, but she didn't need them. On the ground, no one clapped. No one stared. This wasn't the rooftop. This was reality. They debriefed her in a tent that smelled like metal and stale coffee. Questions precise. Answers shorter. They already knew most of it. Her mind had been recorded long before the shot was taken. When it was over, she was alone again. That was when it hit. Not the fear, not the guilt. The doubt. Had she done the right thing by stepping back onto the battlefield she'd been pulled from? Had she endangered everyone by existing, by being seen? She sat on a cot, elbows on knees, staring at the dirt. The storm raged outside, sand rattling against canvas like impatient fingers. She thought of Sullivan, of the way his certainty had crumbled. Not because he was cruel, because he was scared. Men like him survived by believing strength had only one shape: muscles, volume, aggression. Anything else threatened the math they'd built their lives on. She threatened it. That carried weight. The flap opened. Hayes stepped in, ducking automatically. "They're moving you," he said. "Where?" she asked. "Not back to cyber." She searched his face, found nothing. "They think you're compromised again?" she asked. He hesitated. That told her everything. "Too visible," he said carefully, "too effective." She laughed once, no humor in it. "Figures." He leaned against a crate. "You saved an embassy, 50 civilians, a platoon of Marines." "And reminded the wrong people I still exist," she replied. Hayes didn't argue. "That shot on the crane," he said instead, "that wasn't instinct, that was trust in yourself." Clay looked away. "That's what scares them," she said. He smiled faintly. "That's what scares everyone." Later, alone again, she lay back and stared at the tent ceiling. The hum of generators blended with the storm until it sounded like ocean waves. She hadn't heard the ocean in years. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the crane swaying, the helicopter spiraling. The moment before the trigger broke, that fragile space where everything still could have gone wrong. People thought snipers loved that moment. They didn't understand. That moment was terror dressed as calm. Morning came gray and bitter. Orders arrived without ceremony. She packed quietly. Laptop, glasses, no rifle this time. As she walked toward transport, a young Marine approached her, fresh-faced, nervous. "Ma'am," he said, voice cracking slightly, "I just wanted to say thank you." She nodded, didn't know what else to give him. "Back on the roof," he continued, "I was sure we were dead." She met his eyes, saw herself in them, younger, unproven, afraid. "So was I," she said. His surprise softened into something else. Relief maybe, permission. She boarded the vehicle. As it pulled away, Clay watched the base recede into dust. She didn't know where they were sending her, or how long she'd be hidden this time. But she knew something had changed. Not the world. Sorry. She had stepped forward when silence demanded action. She had accepted visibility knowing the cost. Redemption, she realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing again, even when you knew the outcome might hurt. The storm followed her down the road, relentless and patient. And for the first time in a long while, Clay didn't feel like running from it. What happens when the world finally notices you and decides it doesn't know what to do with you? Clay felt the answer in the days that followed, not as a single blow but as pressure. Slow, quiet, inescapable. They moved her again. No explanations, no apologies, just orders wrapped in politeness. A transport at dawn, a different base, a room with no windows and walls too clean to feel human. Her name wasn't spoken often. When it was, it carried weight now. Careful weight. She wasn't invisible anymore. And that, she was learning, was its own kind of danger. The debrief stretched over hours, analysts behind glass, officers who never raised their voices. They replayed the footage frame by frame. The crane, the storm, the helicopter breaking apart like a thought that had been held too long. "Why didn't you take cover?" one of them asked. Clay watched herself on the screen, standing alone while everyone else ran. "Because running wouldn't have saved anyone," she said. They nodded, wrote notes. None of them met her eyes. That night, alone in another temporary room, she finally let herself feel it. Not pride. Grief. The faces blurred together, the sniper on the crane, the man with the megaphone, the gunner who never fired. People reduced to targets because circumstance had made them so. She didn't romanticize it, never had. She wondered if any of them had doubted themselves the way she did now. Sleep came in fragments. When she woke, her heart was racing, fingers twitching as if still on the trigger. She sat up, pressed her feet into the floor, reminded herself where she was. Safe. That word felt thin. Days passed. No rifle, no mission, just waiting. Waiting had always been harder than action. In action there was clarity. In waiting there was room for doubt to grow teeth. She thought about Sullivan again. About the way his apology hadn't been about her, not really, but about his world cracking. She didn't hate him for it. She understood it. People mocked what they didn't want to question. One afternoon, Hayes visited her again. No uniform this time, just fatigue in his posture. "They're arguing," he said. "About what?" she asked. "About you." She almost smiled. "They want to make an example," he continued. "Problem is, they can't decide which kind." She leaned back against the wall. "Let me guess, either a cautionary tale or a miracle." "Something like that." "Neither fits," she said. Hayes studied her. "No, you're inconvenient." That landed harder than any insult. Inconvenient meant uncontrollable, uncomfortable, hard to reduce to a headline or a doctrine. "They're worried," he added, "not about your skill, about the message." Clay closed her eyes. She already knew. A woman, quiet, technical, lethal when necessary, everything the old stories didn't account for. "What do you want?" Hayes asked. The question caught her off guard. She hadn't been asked that in a long time. She thought of the desk jobs, the hiding, the feeling of being folded away for everyone else's comfort. "I want to be useful," she said finally, "without being erased." He nodded slowly. "That's a dangerous request." She smiled faintly. "So I've been told." That night she walked the perimeter of the base alone, boots crunching on gravel. The sky was clear now, stars sharp and indifferent. She remembered lying on cold rock, lining up shots by starlight, trusting math more than hope. She missed it. Not the killing. The purpose. A message came just before dawn. Not official, personal. A secure line she hadn't seen in years. She stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Clay," the voice said, familiar, female, steady. "You made some noise." Clay closed her eyes. "Admiral," she replied. "They can't put you back in the box," the woman continued, "and they can't leave you where you are." "I figured," Clay said. "There's a third option." Silence stretched. "Off the books," the Admiral said. "No title, no spotlight. You choose when you step in and when you disappear." Clay felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, recognition. "And the cost?" she asked. "You'll never be normal again," the Admiral said gently. Clay looked up at the sky, at the stars that had never asked permission to exist. "I wasn't normal to begin with," she said. The line went dead. At sunrise, Clay packed again. Fewer things this time. She learned what mattered. As she walked toward the transport, she felt lighter. Not because the burden was gone, but because it finally made sense. Strength, she realized, wasn't about forcing your way into someone else's story. Sometimes it was about refusing to disappear from your own. And as the vehicle rolled forward, carrying her toward a future that had no clear edges, Clay allowed herself one quiet truth. Redemption wasn't given. It was claimed. What does it mean to choose the shadows after the world has already seen you? Clay learned the answer not in a single moment, but in the way days stopped following any pattern she recognized. No insignia, no public record, no chain of command that could be written down, just a series of calls that came when they came and silences that stretched long enough to test her resolve. She became a ghost with purpose. The first mission after the decision was small, smaller than the embassy. No crowds, no speeches, just a team that didn't ask who she was, only what she could do. That suited her. They met at night, in a place that smelled like oil and rain. Clay wore no rank, no visible authority, Only a slim case over her shoulder and the quiet confidence of someone who had already lost what fear could take. She noticed the way the others watched her hands. Professionals always did. The target wasn't a man this time. It was information. A server hidden beneath concrete and bureaucracy, feeding violence from a distance. Clay moved through the digital maze the same way she once moved through terrain, patiently, precisely, leaving no trace of ego behind. When it was done, no one cheered. They simply moved on. And for the first time in years, Clay felt aligned, her mind and her history no longer at odds, but braided together. She wasn't pretending to be something else. She wasn't forced to be only one thing. She was whole. But wholeness didn't mean peace. On the third mission, a younger operator made a mistake. Not fatal, not careless, just human, a missed signal, a second too slow. Clay adjusted without thinking, stepped forward when she hadn't been assigned to, took responsibility that wasn't hers by order. Later alone, the weight of it settled. If she hadn't been there, the outcome would have been different. That knowledge was dangerous. It could turn into arrogance if she let it, or guilt. She chose neither. Instead, she let it remind her why restraint mattered as much as action. Between missions, Clay stayed nowhere long enough to feel settled. Safe houses, anonymous rooms, long nights with nothing but the hum of electricity and her own thoughts. That was when doubt tried again. Not about her skill, about her worth. Was she only valuable when something needed to be destroyed, when a system needed breaking, when a shot needed to be taken no one else could take? She thought of the young Marine who'd thanked her, of Sullivan trying to rebuild certainty from the ruins of his assumptions, of the civilians who would never know her name. Maybe that was enough. One evening, as she cleaned her glasses at a bare table, Hayes' voice came through the secure line again. "They're telling stories about you," he said. She smiled faintly. "They always do." "Some of them are wrong," he added. "They usually are. They say you're fearless." She stopped wiping the lens. "That's the most wrong," she said quietly. Fear was always there. It sat beside her on every mission. It sharpened edges. It reminded her of consequence. Fearless people didn't last. "Do you regret it?" Hayes asked. She didn't answer right away. Regret was a complicated thing. It wasn't a single emotion. It was a collection of moments you wished you'd had more time inside. "I regret the times I stayed silent when I should have spoken," she said finally, "and the times I spoke when silence would have been kinder." He let that sit. "They need you again," he said, "different scale." Clay closed her eyes. She knew that tone. Bigger stakes didn't mean louder battles. They meant narrower margins, fewer second chances. "Where?" she asked. "High ground, bad weather, too many variables." "Of course." She thought of the crane, the storm, the moment the world narrowed to a breath. "I'm in," she said. Before the line cut, Hayes added, "For what it's worth, you changed things." Clay looked at her reflection in the dark screen. Older now, not hardened, clarified. "I didn't change them," she replied. "I just stopped pretending." She packed slowly, deliberately. The ritual grounded her. As she stepped back into motion, Clay understood something she hadn't before. Choosing the shadows wasn't retreat. It was commitment. Because real strength didn't need to be seen to matter. And real resilience wasn't loud. It endured. Quietly, relentlessly, until it was needed again. Why does the moment that changes everything always arrive quietly? There was no dramatic briefing this time, no raised voices, no speeches meant to harden resolve. Clay received the coordinates on a secure device while sitting alone, boots resting on cold concrete, dawn barely touching the horizon. The message was brief, precise, almost gentle. High altitude, civilian risk, one chance. She stared at the screen longer than necessary. This was the kind of mission people talked about in hindsight, using words like turning point and defining moment. But standing there, all Clay felt was familiarity, the steady pull of responsibility, the calm before choosing. She packed slowly, each movement deliberate, rifle, data kit, glasses, nothing extra. She had learned over years and mistakes that excess was a lie people told themselves to feel prepared. On the flight in, the landscape unfolded beneath her. Ridgelines cut sharp by shadow, villages still asleep, lives moving forward unaware of how close they drifted to the edge of other people's decisions. She wondered briefly if that ignorance was a mercy. The team inserted just before weather closed in. Wind already clawed at fabric and skin. Visibility shrank by the minute, the kind of conditions commanders hated and reality loved. Clay took position alone, not because she asked to, because everyone understood why. The target was a single figure moving between structures on a remote ridge. Not a monster, not a symbol, just a man whose actions would trigger consequences far beyond the mountain he stood on. Clay settled behind the rifle and let the world narrow. This was where people imagined clarity lived, in the scope, in the numbers, in the clean geometry of distance and wind. But clarity, she had learned, came earlier. It came in accepting the weight of choice before pretending it could be reduced to math. She felt tired. Not physically, existentially. Tired of being exceptional only in moments of violence. Tired of knowing that the skills she had honed to perfection would always be called upon when something needed to end. Her finger rested alongside the trigger. She breathed. The wind shifted, the storm surged, the margin closed. In her earpiece, someone whispered, "You're clear when ready." Clay didn't answer. She watched the man pause, adjust his pack, look out over the valley like someone considering a future. She wondered if he felt important. She wondered if he felt afraid. She wondered, for a fleeting second, what her life might have been if silence had been kinder to her earlier, if respect had come before proof, if she'd been allowed to exist without justification. The thought passed. The world didn't pause for fairness. She took the shot. The rifle spoke once. Clean, final, necessary. The figure collapsed, absorbed by distance and weather. The ridge returned to emptiness. For a long moment, Clay didn't move. The storm swallowed the sound. Nature, indifferent as ever, erased evidence with efficiency no human system could match. Confirmed came the voice, controlled, professional. Clay exhaled slowly and leaned back from the scope. That was it. No cheers, no applause, just the quiet understanding that something terrible had been prevented by something equally irreversible. Extraction was uneventful, the kind of uneventful that only happens when the most dangerous part is already over. As the aircraft lifted her away, Clay looked down once more, not searching for meaning but acknowledging cost. She had stopped pretending those were the same thing. Back at a temporary facility, she cleaned her rifle in silence. The motions were familiar enough to feel like meditation. Around her, others moved on. New tasks, new concerns. The machine never stopped. Later, alone in a small room with a single light, she removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. Not regret. Not pride. Acceptance. She thought of the girl on the embassy roof, dismissed, mocked, pushed aside. The one told to hide, to shrink, to be quieter than the moment demanded. She thought of the woman who had stood in a storm and trusted herself anyway. They were the same person. That mattered. Her device buzzed softly. A message from Hayes. No operational content, just 4 words. You did what mattered. Clay stared at the screen, then set it face down. She didn't need reassurance anymore. In the days that followed, she faded back into obscurity by design. No ceremony, no record, just another unmarked transfer, another quiet disappearance. And she was okay with that, because she had learned something the loudest voices never did. Strength wasn't proven by how much space you took. It was proven by how much weight you carried, without demanding acknowledgement. Clay Vance didn't need the world to understand her story. She only needed to live it honestly. And somewhere out there, people would wake up, go about their lives, never knowing how close they'd come to losing everything, or how quietly it had been saved. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.